ability to provide some on-demand content as we go forward, because I know a lot of people have things come up and we'll be looking forward to being able to dive into this. So the interactive part of that, I think obviously will be a little bit more challenging, but it'll give us an opportunity, for those that are watching this for the first time in the future. Wow, that's kind of trippy. But if you're watching this now, later than now, and you've got questions, obviously anybody on the PTP team would be happy to engage with you, and we can reach out and schedule some time to get deeper. But with that, thanks for people participating in this event. During the summer, we like to be able to roll up our sleeves and do a little bit of training, and good opportunity for people to gain some skills on some resources that they're using and be able to provide some impact back to the business. So today, what we wanted to do is get into some cloud management tools. CloudCheckr is a core partner of PTP's for cloud management around cost optimization, security optimization, and just visibility into your cloud environment. We've done a lot of events where we scratch the surface a little bit with CloudCheckr and give you kind of a holistic view of the capabilities and talk about the security best practices and the security checks. And we do a little bit around what we can do from a cost savings perspective, but we keep it fairly high level for a lot of those engagements. What we're hoping to do today is to get into more of the detail. And so think about a user in an environment that's going to be using this on a, either on a day-to-day basis or on a consistent basis, and how to really drive impact. So, we're kind of calling this the quote unquote 303 training. So just assume that, you've got some level of understanding and use of the tools, and now how to take that to the next level. And with that, we've got, some great team members to be with you today. Hong is a cloud architect from PTP, and Jarrett's a technical account manager from CloudCheckr, now part of NetApp, Spot by NetApp. So with that, I will kick it over to you guys, allow you to do some introductions, and then just kind of get things going and start working through the content. We've scheduled about an hour and a half for today's session. It may go, who knows, we'll just kind of see how it goes fluidly. If there are questions or comments, please throw those into Q&A or chat, and we'll be happy to, I'll be taking a look at that, and we can stop down and take a look at that. But with that, guys, let's kick it off.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Gary. And thanks for the introduction there. So yeah, as Gary mentioned, I'm a technical account manager at CloudCheckr. I've been with the company about 7 years now in a multitude of different roles, but most recently, as of this year, moved into the technical account management role. So happy to meet you guys and happy to go over everything that we're going to go over today, which is a pretty packed schedule.
Awesome. Hong Pun here, cloud architect PTP. I work closely with CloudCheckr and the tool. I'm in there pretty much every day to help our customers, use it from a cost optimization perspective to, security best practices, everything that CloudCheckr has to offer. Today Jarrett and I were going to dive deep into some of the more advanced stuff that you guys might not see every day.
Perfect. And let me just share my screen here real quick and get things started. I promise you, I am not going to be doing very many slides here. This is really just to start a baseline conversation, and then pretty much the rest of this will be inside of the actual platform. And let's just, so you guys can still see these slides,
yes.
Correct?
Yep.
Okay, cool, perfect. So for this training today, as we said, packed agenda, right? So we have a couple different takeaways that we're really looking at getting out of today, which is going through customized automated best practice checks, which we're going to start just a baseline conversation of what these things look like. The cost savings report, the advanced grouping report, the save filters and the automated emails that are associated with those, right sizing, tag mapping, and custom tags for dashboards and advanced grouping. So we're just going to go through quickly of what these features look like and just a very, very general high-level overview so you know what we're talking about. And then we're going to dive into how each of them works, how to actually configure these things, and give you takeaways where you'll be able to leave this conversation with actionable insights on how you can create these things. And within each module, we're really looking at things like cloud environment health, the low-hanging fruit of cost optimization, how to quickly get easy wins there, granular cost analyses, how you can perform those, resource utilization confidence, custom tags, and then again, mapping of those custom tags that you create in CloudCheckr, And so the first one that we talked about was best practice checks. Just all that I want to point out here is just that the best practice check engine, which probably a lot of you are familiar with, is really what guides CloudCheckr, right? It runs a lot of our other reports. Our other reports are pulling data from this report, especially on the cost side. When we look at our cost savings report, a lot of what we pull from there comes from these best practice checks. And CloudCheckr has over 600 best practice checks across multiple clouds. And all of these are from different industry standards, from different compliance frameworks. They've really come from a lot of different places and grown over the years. I think when I joined, we were probably about 215, 220. So in the last 7 years, we've gained about another 400 or so. And as you can see there, we also include things like trusted advisor checks. So then, as I mentioned, our cost savings report, this is just a real quick summary report that we see that goes and shows us, hey, you have idle instances, you have unused resources that you could take care of, and it's going to give you just a quick snapshot of that easy win column that you can go and check off the boxes and save some money right now. Advanced grouping, this is really just a report that we're going to go through that looks through how can you do those more granular cost analyses, right? You have a end customer that is saying, or you have a specific department within your company, right? That's saying, what are we spending for project A and what are we spending for project B? How can we actually follow these through to the different departments? How can we charge back to the finance team, to the engineering team, all that sort of thing. Or even so, you have the finance team asking about a team, right? And you say, okay, well, what exactly is the engineering team spending this money on? How do we understand not only what services are they using, but what are those services doing? Is there any optimization that we could be looking at there? Just really getting into exactly where every penny is going from your organization. We also have our right sizing report, which this will take all of the current instances that you have running, and we're going to help you get confidence in those. We're going to help you look at those and make sure that you know that these are the right sized instances that you have today. Should they be downsized? Should they potentially be upsized? We'll give you a score and basically run through that and say, okay, this instance should be downsized because typically this is what the peak utilization looks like and that sort of thing. But a couple different metrics there that we just really use to grade those out. And we'll give you a better idea of how your environment's looking in terms of the instances that you have running. Tag mapping is another thing in a construct that we're going to talk about several times today. So this construct is a CloudCheckr based construct, which is one important thing to understand here. So when we're doing tag mapping, when we're creating tags and talking about creating these tags, these are all going to live within CloudCheckr itself, right? So these aren't necessarily writing back to AWS or anything like that. These are a construct that CloudCheckr is going to use for things like advanced grouping reports, for creating up dashboards, and just for helping you to map and understand if you have a tagging strategy that's not 100% sound, which I don't really know anybody that has one that is truly 100% sound. If you do, I would love to see it, and I would love to pick your brain on it of how we can educate other customers to follow the same standards that you guys are doing. So please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or my email. But this is one way that we have helped a lot of people to basically start progressing their tagging strategy toward where they want it to be. And again, with custom tags, you can then use the custom tags that we create across things like advanced grouping reports. You can go in and you can filter on a specific tag that you've then created with this new tagging construct. And so that's all I have for the slides for right now. So let's just jump right into the platform, which I'm assuming you guys can still see here.
Yep.
All right. So from the start, right, we're going to start in the first module, which is really around cloud health environment monitoring. And how we want to look at this is in a couple different ways. Two of our main reports that we'll look at here today are going to be, one is the cost dashboards, and then two will be the best practice checks. So dashboards, this is going to be the first thing that we're going to cover here. And with dashboards, you can have a view of both global and you can have personal, right? So if you are building out dashboards for your team, maybe you're building them out for your finance team, something to that effect, you're going to want to create those on a global view so that everybody that's looking at the specific global view is all looking at the same thing. But users can also have individual personal dashboards. So if you do have one person that's sort of just tracking their own projects and creating that, they just create it through a personal dashboard. With all of our cost dashboards, you also get this expand feature. So obviously this is a great way to just get a quick look into the health of your environment of saying cost-wise, what are we trending at? Is this what we expect? Do we see any spikes? What does this look like and what is our expectation of how it should look? But once you go in there, you can then expand this out and you can look at all the additional details here and see the actual costs broken down, whether it's by service or whatever you have set up for your specific metrics within the dashboard, right? Another thing that you can do is you can always export these, whether you want to export just the PNG to put it into a presentation or something to that effect, or you can also export it as a CSV, and then you can go and do additional detailed analysis on it if you want in Excel or something to that effect. One example of a dashboard that I created here that is often used by a lot of our customers, especially our finance users, right, is they'll want to see something broken out by cost center. So what this looks like is when you're creating a dashboard, you'll open up the dashboard, you'll give it a name. Right now, we only have cost type dashboards, but we do plan to have other types in the future, maybe something to the effect of security alerts, right? Or something with best practice checks where we're bubbling up the best practice checks into a dashboard and giving you a look over the last 60, 90, or 180 days, saying where those stood, whether it was a red alert or a yellow alert or something to that effect. You have a lot of different chart types that you can use here. The vertical bar is pretty much one of the most commonly used, but as you can see when I was scrolling through, there are several different types that folks are using. And I created just a monthly, for the last 3 months, look at a specific cost center, right? So we're going to look at the different cost centers that we have here over 3 months, and we're going to group by tag here. You could group by several other things. You can group by specific account ID, which will also include its friendly name. You don't have to just memorize all those long digit numbers for AWS, which is definitely helpful. You can group by service. That's another very common one, is looking at a 12-month breakdown by service. You can kind of see that to the left here. That's more by operation, but there are a lot of different things that you can do here. And then within your category limit here, this is just what's going to be shown on the initial graph when you're creating this chart. But if you do end up having, let's say you have 50 services that you're using, right? This won't limit you just to the 10 services, or even if you had cost center tags, it won't limit you just to the 10 in total. It will just show them here in a limit of 10. But once you actually expand the data, you would see that there are greater than 10. So you're not missing out on any data by putting in that limit. That is a very quick overview of dashboards, I know, but I feel like this is one of the more straightforward things that folks typically pick up. If you ever have any questions about dashboards, feel free to reach out to both Hong and I. But yeah, for the most part, these are pretty straightforward, right? They're pretty intuitive. You're picking your different chart type, you're picking your different X and Y axes, and creating the chart.
Yeah, definitely powerful, yet simple. It's one of the first screens that you see. But it gives you a ton of information, especially if you're not in there all the time. This is like right there for you. Especially, now Jarrett going through it, helping you, walking you through the customization. Now you can see what you want, at a glance at the screen without digging through, the many possible reports that CloudCheckr offers.
Awesome. The best practice checks are the next thing that we're going to go into. And so with best practice checks, right, the quick thing that you just need to know about them is the ordering system. So how we label them out of the box is you're going to have the red, which is a high alert, a high priority alert. You're going to have orange, which is the next level. You're going to have yellow, which is a little bit less important for things that are just for your knowledge for the most part, but they do have some inherent risk to them. Blue is purely informational. These aren't necessarily risks at all. These are just things to be aware of and kind of dive into them and just see if they're of concern for your organization, but typically for most organizations, these are just considered informational. And then green are the current checks that you're passing, right? And with each check, the nice thing for, especially when people are coming in here for the first time, right, and they're seeing everything light up, and they're like, what does this mean? Does this mean that I have the worst environment in the world? Most likely, no. It does mean that you have a typical environment where we are going to see a lot of things triggering off. And if you're kind of, where do I start? That's why we did the priority ranking system, is you should always just start with those red checks. And within each check, you can actually see exactly what is wrong, why is it wrong, and we're going to even link you back to like AWS documentation, right? So it's not just our deciding that something is a bad thing. This comes from AWS's practices. And it's, again, it's not just us deciding that something is a concern or not. So with these specific best practice checks, you can also have customization on some of these, right? So for example, something like idle DynamoDB tables, right? You might go ahead and say, okay, well, let's see what CloudCheckr today is considering as idle. And you'll just go over to this gear icon and you'll click onto it and you'll see, okay, well, so what CloudCheckr is saying is 2% of idle use over one day. That's what we consider it today, and that's what's triggering this best practice check. I could change this to 5. I could change this to any number, right? I'm going to leave that 2 for now. But the idea is that if you don't necessarily agree with something that is triggering a best practice check, especially for something like an idle instance or something to that effect, if you have different parameters that you're using internally, you can always just go in and update these. Similar to that is when you go to, well, actually, I guess we'll get to that in a second. Another thing that you can go and do when you're in here is you can actually filter by tag too, right? So you could go and you could say, I want to look and see if my tagging strategy actually is perfect. And I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say, all right, so right now I'm going to take this best practice check and I am going to use exclude tags. So this would go and say, and you can see it right here, we're only going to show results for resources that aren't tagged. So you could find not only just some untagged resources, but you could look at some untagged resources that are also causing you security concerns or cost alerts or something to that effect, right? But you could also use include tags just if you are looking at a specific project, again, back to that cost center, or if you have different projects that you're using internally and you use a tagging strategy to track the cost for all of those, you could go and you could look at and filter down to a specific tag.
I do want to point out, since this is a level 300, kind of course, that the config icon that Jarrett showed you guys is it's per account only. Like if you're in the multi-account view, you will not see it, which I know a lot of you guys might be in, because that just gives you a holistic view of all the accounts you have. But if you need to configure, specific best practice, you do need to be in the account, because it's a per account. But the tagging, I think can be done in the multi-account view.
Correct. Yep, and good call out there, Hong. Thank you. Another thing while you're in here that you can do is you can actually set up notifications, right? So we have this little bubble here that if you go and you click onto this, you will then be able to alert to a specific email address when this, let's say this best practice check is triggered. You could get this out to an email. And then we have several other integrations that you can set up, whether it's through PagerDuty, sending something straight to Jira so that you can start a ticket on it, sending it out to Slack in the same kind of idea, or even ServiceNow too, right? So we have several different options that you can do here. But email is one of the main ones that people use to start, but we have a lot of customers that have set up Slack channels where they have all the alerts go into there. They then use the Jira integration to then track the ticket and track the remediation of that best practice check after it's been triggered. One of the last things, other than we're going to talk about maybe 2 more pieces with best practice checks, but I do want to just call out that you can also ignore checks, right? And it's not just on an overall check basis. you could actually go in and look at the specific instance that's triggering the check or specific resource and say, okay, and maybe security is an even better issue to look at for this. But something like you have an open S3 bucket, which obviously in most cases is not a good thing, but you might have an exact specific bucket that is open for one specific reason where you do need that to be public, but you keep getting this CloudCheckr alert triggered. You can go in here and you can just filter out that exact check and say, okay, for this specific resource, I no longer want it to be showing up. And when you do click on that ignore check, you can put a specific reason of why you want it to be ignored, and you can put a date. If you don't put a date, it'll be indefinitely ignored. But you could say maybe we're running a project or a POC that's going to be lasting a certain amount of time. And so you'd put a date of when you want this to expire. And if you do this, just don't worry that they'll disappear forever and you can't kind of get them back. You can always go and click this show ignored button, and you'll be able to dig back into those ones that you have ignored. They will show back up, and you can change the date. You can change if you even want to continue to ignore them, but they're not gone forever once you ignore them.
One quick question, and I don't know if this is the right place to ask the question or not, but I know I've been involved in some discussions with customers where, they define a particular security policy, and so they'd like to get, instead of necessarily just a dashboard view, but maybe get alerted somehow if something is deployed in their environment that doesn't necessarily follow that policy. For example, we want all our S3 buckets encrypted. So, instead of just doing a review once a week or how often you've got the time to pop into CloudCheckr and see, oh, I've got 3 S3 buckets. Is there a way to set that up to where I get notified, hey, somebody went and deployed a new instance and attached an S3 bucket, and by the way, it's not encrypted? Is there a way to set that up or make somebody a responsible party aware?
Sure. Let me just double check. Do we have, so we have 37 different checks around S3. Let me see. Okay, so there we go. So doesn't have default encryption would be one, right? And maybe it's not necessarily default encryption you're looking for in this instance, but we have 36 other checks. That might be one of them. I'd have to go through kind of each one just to confirm. But in terms of what you're asking for, Gary, overall, yes, right? So you could go in and you could create an alert based on this best practice check and say, okay, every time that one of these buckets is coming out with without this default encryption, I want to go and create this notification. And yes, through all the different alerting avenues, I guess I should say, you could do.
Yeah, perfect. I think that was just the main thing. Like whether it's an admin user, not using multi-factor authentication or whatever, whatever those elements are that are important to an organization. How do I get that notification quickly? So I think that covers
exactly. That. Yep. I will admit, I mean, I know that CloudCheckr has a little bit of overkill of data sometimes, so I don't have all 600 best practice checks memorized, but yes, each one of them has that same functionality where you can go through, and if you have a specific concern, you can go find the specific related best practice check and set up account notifications that are going to go to the right folks. Another one too that Gary made me kind of think of here is that we also have an ability to do fix nows, right? So you could go in here and anything that you see with this little automation symbol, you can go and you can actually create a request for something to be fixed. So these will be the best practice checks overall out of the box are read only, and as is CloudCheckr typically as a whole. There are just a lot of additional permissions that you can add for some of our automation capabilities. But I mean, back in the day, when we first started, a lot of people didn't like things automatically happening in their environment. We tried to tell them that they were very specific things that are happening, and it took them a while, but now everyone is begging for everything to be automated, right? So it took a while for the rest of the folks to get there, but now people are more comfortable with what's going on in their environment, understanding what these automations mean. And so we have additional permissions that you can add and do some of these fixes. So when you do these fixes, you can essentially go in and you can request a fix, which will then go to a workflow for the automation, and then an admin can accept or deny that change. But you can do a fix now, or you can do a fix always for some of them, where it's just going to go ahead and anytime that this best practice check triggers, we're going to go, okay, we've already received the permissions to do this action, and we've already received the consent that every time that this best practice check is triggered, we're going to automatically remediate the issue.
The one other thing I want to point out is, it's a simple yet I think powerful feature that I don't think other tools or competitors have is the snapback feature. It goes back I think 7 years, right, Jarrett, of
Yep.
of data. Not only just that you can go back, but for if you need to show progress to upper management, that's a good way to show, okay, well, a month earlier, we have, I don't know, 93, let's say, right? And then today compare, oh, we've made progress either up or down. So that's a good way, to it's a good feature, very, very powerful feature to go back in time to show, what had happened.
Yes, very good call out. And that is exactly how I've seen many customers using it, right? Is looking at the first of the month and the last of the month and creating some sort of report around that saying, like you said, we have 93 issues today, but we had 115 at the beginning of the month. So good call out there. Another thing I want to mention is that you can actually create custom best practice checks. So this again goes to where we're giving the access and control to you guys. So with custom best practice checks, it's pretty straightforward. We have some guides and really good documentation on our success site that can walk you through exactly what's going on. But really, you're just creating an AWS config rule that's going to trigger and fire off a Lambda function, right? So and you'll have to bear with me as my laptop sounds like it's about to take off for flight. So I don't know what's going on with my Chrome CPU usage from the WebEx and CloudCheckr. But yeah, you can essentially go in here and create the config rule, and you can have all the different parameters. You have the Lambda function. We'll show you how you can package the function, right? You'll create the handler and the role, all that fun stuff. But essentially, if you don't see something within all of our 600 plus best practice checks, and you have a very custom use case that you're like, okay, well, we could create something within AWS and create that config rule to have a Lambda function go and perform an action for us on this basis, or just to fire off a notification, whatever that may be. We give you that ability to create these custom best practice checks on top of what we already have. And then I think the last thing we're going to cover for best practice checks is probably just the overall editing of the best practice checks and creating policies, right? So once you have an idea of, okay, this is how the best practice checks are sort of working, I've got a good handle on how they work generally, you might have specific accounts that you think are hyper secure environment accounts where you want all of the security checks to actually be read. You can go ahead and come in here and create a policy where you're actually deciding, okay, instead of this being an orange check, I'm going to make it a red check, right? You can you can decide on what level of priority all of the different best practice checks are, and you can create them as policies. So you can make all of these different policies, as many as you want. You can go through, create a new one, create a different hierarchy, even turn off some of the best practice checks. And then once you create that, you can go and assign them to specific accounts, right? So once you have maybe one series of, let's say you create a super secure version policy for all of your accounts that are going to have that high security requirement, you could go and assign it to all of the different accounts that fall within that bracket. So that is pretty much everything that we have for the best practice checks. And I know that was a little bit long on sort of one of our core features, but it really is so core to everything that we're doing that it drives a lot of the things that we're going to be going through in the next hour or so here. Any questions on that so far, you guys?
Nope, so far so good.
Right. Perfect. Well, then we're going to jump back here to the cost savings report, which we had also mentioned there. And so within the cost savings report, again, these are driven by the best practice checks, right? So that idle, I think this is one that we even look, actually that was idle DynamoDB table. So let's look at that one. This was that best practice check where we had said, okay, if you wanted to customize, you could change what the percentage of idle means. But right now, this is what is firing off from that check. So these are the results. We're giving you the exact tables. We're giving you exactly what the monthly provision write cost is. We're really just going through and showing you all the resources that you have that are idle under this section here. Same thing with unused, and one of the biggest things I'll always see is unattached EBS volumes. That's a big one that once the instance is gone, right, you just have these EBS volumes. I had one customer that had about $31,000 a month of EBS unattached volumes. They're quite a large company, and it was about 5,000 to 6,000 unattached EBS volumes. So I tried to offer to them that I would go in and clean them up for them if they just gave me 10% of the monthly savings. They did not do that. But yeah, it's one of the ones that you'll often see where those unattached EBS volumes will just be hanging around. And this is a really easy way to go and see them because it'll show you exactly what account it's in, when it was last attached, that sort of thing. But for example, like unattached ELBs, right? You're going to see the exact load balancer. You're going to see what the monthly cost is, and you're going to see, well, it's not actually pointing to anything. So again, I would take some of this with a grain of salt when you're looking at these things, right? CloudCheckr is building a lot of these off of best practice checks, which are just, again, overall best practice checks. It's the best practice, but you might have specific resources where you say, okay, we know that this elastic load balancer exists, and we know that it's not pointing to anything right now, but because it's only $9 a month, we are keeping it spun up for if we have a project that starts up tomorrow, kind of thing. There are still nuances that you'll want to look through with your own context that you're applying to these recommendations.
Yeah, we always tell our customer where, it's not always something that you need to take action on, but at least have the compensation. So,
Exactly.
the owner at least knows about it if they don't, right? And then, yeah, act accordingly to that.
Exactly. And that's really what we're providing here is right the information to make those educated educated decisions. We're going through with the best practice checks. The reason that they're prioritized like that is because those are the things that are going to be the highest alerts and the things that you should know about and should be having conversations about. If you do decide that they need to be ignored, if you do decide that it maybe needs to be a different priority, that's fine. But these are things that the industry, AWS, Microsoft, that they're all saying these are issues. And these are where we see customers having issues. Another thing that we're going to look at here is we do have RI recommendations that bubble up to here as well. So we'll look at, and this is just like a general overview here where you can kind of see what the RI recommendations are. But if you actually want to dive into those, we can go into cost, reserve usage, recommendations, and then we have several different types here. Only EC2 bubbles up to this general cost savings report, but you can go through and you can actually look at the different recommendations. And one thing that CloudCheckr does is we look at things over 30, 60, 90, and 180 days. So this is a little bit more than what AWS is doing within the console itself. I believe they only do up to 90, at least last I had seen. You can look at different types of reserved instances, right? You can look at 1-year commits, 3-year commits. You can look at standard versus convertible RIs. You can look at the different region or availability zone if you have a specific one that you're looking for. And then anytime you see these types of filters across CloudCheckr, I'm sure some of you guys are pretty familiar with them, but these little binoculars will just open up an easier way to sort through the different filters here instead of just having to roll through this list and do a control click kind of thing. But you can get extremely granular even with just the recommendations you want to look at here, right? And we're going to go through and we're going to do an overall summary, but let's just go down to here because this is really where you're going to get the information that you're looking for. And all of these expand out, right? So we're saying overall that we have a recommendation here and we'll give you what the no upfront, the partial upfront, and the all upfront costs look like. Then we'll even break it down to, okay, what does the actual on-demand monthly cost look like? What is the total savings that we can expect, including the upfront costs? We're really going and saying, okay, not only are we saying that this should be on an RI, it's this should be on an RI, and here is why. Here is data from the last, 1, 2, 3, 6 months that we're saying we've been monitoring this instance, and this is what we're seeing in terms of what your return on investment is going to look like. So these are what we just consider, again, part of that low-hanging fruit, similar to the cost savings report of you can just jump right in here and get recommendations today, and you could go and you could purchase this RI. Once you have some of those RIs, another thing that's going to fall under both the low-hanging fruit cost optimization piece as well as the resource utilization confidence is up in our resource report. We have the right sizing report, which is going to go through and give you a quick grading of your instances. I know I mentioned this a little bit in that slide deck earlier, but you can go and let's see, I'm actually going to sort this by, and this is a test account, so you're not going to see any crazy numbers probably for the savings, but typically what I'll do is I'll look at the possible hourly savings and filter by that, just so I can at least start with what is the biggest opportunity that I have? Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? But we're going to give you a utilization score, which is between 0 and 10. And 0 is where your resource just sort of is existing, but it's extremely underutilized, right? We're saying that you might be using something like T2 medium, and maybe you need a T2 micro instead. We're going to be going through and looking at those sort of things where just giving you information based on memory, based on average CPU, a couple different metrics here about where that score is coming from. One additional thing that you can add into the CloudCheckr platform for this is if you guys are using something like a Datadog today, or if you're using CloudWatch metrics, you can go in and put those integrations into CloudCheckr to get this memory metric, which is going to add a greater capability of our ability to create these utilization scores. But overall, out of the box, still, these are quite helpful of just getting a quick look at, am I over provisioned? Am I under provisioned? And what should I do about it specifically, right? We're actually going to give you the specific instances that you should be moving to. And with that too, you can request fixes. So if you request a fix, this will again go to an automation workflow where an admin will actually have to accept this. So don't worry if you have someone that you're worried about saying, okay, well, they're just going to go in and click all these buttons in my organization, because that's just the type of person that they are. It doesn't mean that when they say, okay, I'm just going to right size this instance, that CloudCheckr goes and immediately does it. There are, again, additional permissions that need to be added in here. We're going to be adding some permissions around being able to describe instances, stop instances, modify instances, start instances. So there's a lot of different frameworks that need to be put in place before this even can happen. But again, it's going to go and be looked at by an admin. So it doesn't just happen all of a sudden. And actually, we're going to look at that really quickly of just what that looks like. So with the workflow here, you can see, for example, here is an EC2 instance resize that was rejected, right? So it didn't happen. But the nice thing is it does give you exactly, okay, what was suggested? It was, okay, this is the original size. This is the account that we're looking at. This is the instance. This is the new size that was recommended. And then you can see the date that it was performed and everything like that. But it gives you a complete audit history. So even if this was to be accepted, you would still get all of this information, and you would see what was it before, who was it performed by, who actually accepted that change. We'll give you all of that data, and even you can dig into it a little bit more of when it was opened and who it was opened by.
Yeah, I want to really quickly point out that I know Jarrett went through, the cost savings dashboard, and then jumped over to reserve instance because of how it flows from that screen to the other, and then right sizing. But I guess in practice, what we recommend is definitely look at the cost savings first. Take out anything you don't need and all the idle stuff. Make sure you clean those up. Then the next step you should go to right sizing, right? Things that you need. Once you get them sized correctly, up or down, then you go and make the commitment to reserve instance. So I know it's a little different from how he showed you, but practice wise, that's how you should go, because you don't want to commit to something that's not sized correctly.
Very good point. All right. And now we're going to get to, I know that I said the best practice checks are one of the biggest features. Now we're going to get to what is probably the other biggest feature, and that's going to be our advanced grouping report, which is going to be under our custom reporting under cost. So once you go to the advanced grouping report, right, this is just the report that I was mentioning that is really good for granular cost analysis. This can be broken out, let's see, let's look at maybe breakdown by service, and then let's do operation.
It's not just a report, I want to point out. It's a very powerful tool. It does a lot.
Yeah, it definitely is. And it's going to be able to give you a lot of detailed data. Sometimes, again, I don't want to make it seem like it's as overwhelming as it is. You can use it in simpler terms. You could look at something just like cost per month over a period of time, right? But I just want to give you a little bit of a more full scope of what this would look like in practice if you are doing a little bit more of detailed cost investigation. So again, we have all these different filters here. You could filter down to specific accounts that you're looking at. You could even, if you're investigating a specific cost that someone's asked you about and you're like, okay, well, where did this cost come from the Frankfurt region? We don't really have resources in the Frankfurt region. You could just deselect all of these and look at just Frankfurt, right? It's a great investigation tool, again, for when you have specific issues around, like, okay, I have a specific service. I don't know why we're spending so much. I have a specific, even like usage type, right? If you really want to jump into something like box usage, right? Like if you want to look at specifically, why are our box usage costs so high lately? I'm going to run this really quickly and just show you sort of what a general look at the service, operation, usage type, and description looks like over a 1 month period. And with the advanced grouping report as well, what we're going to see here is that we can also create save filters once we have a filter that we like. And I'll get more into that in a second here, but I just wanted you to know that it is possible to create these on a saved basis, and they'll populate much quicker once you have them saved in there. But so what we have here is over that period, that 1 month period, we had $15,000 of spend, right? Okay, well, where is that spend actually coming from? Looks like CloudTrail was almost half of it, and it's going to be in order of ranked order of what the cost is, right? So you can go through though, and you can actually see exactly what is going on within the service too, right? It's not just saying, okay, well, I spent money on CloudTrail. I spent money on CloudTrail, and that was for events to be recorded. And okay, well, where were those events even recorded? All right, well, these ones were in the US East region. But if we're just going to keep going down through that, I think EC2 is probably a little bit of a better one to look at for some folks. But we're going to look at things like volume usage. We're going to look at things like creating snapshots. We're going to look at things like actual like running of the instances, right? Like we're really breaking down all of the costs instead of just saying, I spent this much on a service. It's really knowing what you spent and like understanding that and being able to relay that to management teams, being able to relay that to finance teams, being able to remediate if all of a sudden my run instances are way higher than I ever expected, and they're way higher than they were the last 3 months. It gives you a little bit more description of exactly what action was taken that caused that spike in spend. And again, I know that that's a little bit more of a detailed query there, but you can play around with a lot of different queries here. These all sort of stack too, right? As you can see, so they go from left to right. We're looking at the service first, and then we're looking at the operation, then the usage type, and then that sort of thing. And we're going to come back to this report. We're going to talk a little bit more about tags at some point once we go through how to build tags and whatnot, which is coming up actually shortly after this section. But does that all make sense too right now? Cool. Didn't see any new questions come through. So
Yep. All good.
No questions.
Another thing, I know I had mentioned it in passing, was just that you can create a save filter, right? So you just save this filter here, and then you could go and once you create it, it'll just populate and query for you. And with these save filters, you can create email lists, right? So you can send this report daily, you can send it weekly, you can send it monthly. You can include the CSV on it if you wanted a downloaded output of what this report is spitting out. We have so many finance teams using save filters and advanced grouping for monthly billing, especially once they start to really start leveraging CloudCheckr's tagging policies, and they're creating tags based on their different business units. They're creating it on different projects. They'll use that to do their actual billing every single month for the most part. And that's pretty much where we're going to go in terms of things with the advanced grouping report. Now that we've talked about sort of reports on a schedule too for the like save filters being able to be emailed out, I'm going to go into two other things about just notifications in general, right? So we can look at email settings for the account. And so one thing to note is that there are two different sets of email settings in here. And under the account configuration just means that that's for this specific account that we're looking at, not for any groupings of accounts. It's just going to be for the individual account. But we have things like alert emails, right, for just simple spikes in spend. This is a pretty basic email that is used here and a pretty basic alert. We're going to go into a more detailed one in a couple seconds here, but essentially just wanted you guys to know that there are different alerts that you can set up just out of the box. You can go through and look at daily emails, which is going to be your daily bill, and you have the ability to decide on the times, the days when you want to receive these things. You could go through the best practice checks and you could decide you want to get a daily email on any new red alert priority best practice checks. You could go through and we have, again, so many other reports that we're not even going to have time to cover today, but other things like the cost changes report or something like the, I don't know, I guess the automation report even would be a good example, right? But you can sort of dive into these and create your own alerting systems via email for these. We have the same thing for weekly pretty much as well, which is going to be more like trend reports. So you're looking at just the weekly trends of what was going on with the EC2 resource utilization, or what did my best practice checks look like this week versus last week. Similar with monthly, you can specify a specific day of the month where you want to have the best practice checks emailed out to you, or you could say you want the summary of your monthly bill, that sort of thing. But a more interesting way of alerting is actually under our cost alerts. And so with our cost alerts, what you can do is there are currently 5 types, but we are deprecating these 2. We don't really have anyone that are leveraging these last 2 very much. It's really these top 3 that are mostly used. So the first one we're going to go through is just a simple alert of being able to look at your budget, right? So let's say I have a $5,000 budget for the month. And I want to be alerted when I've hit the 90% threshold. I can set this up so that it's going to go based on the monthly bill budget. And we're just going to go by AWS's terms here in terms of what that cycle looks like. Or if you really wanted to, you could go through your own specific budget cycle of what you're looking at, right? You can add additional thresholds. So maybe I want to get 75% before I hit 90. So I have at least an alert for a little bit of wiggle room before I hit that. You can keep going down, you can keep adding more, right? But this is just a quick way to keep an eye on what's going on with your budget and make sure that you're aware of if you're starting to blow through your spend in the beginning of the month. Is that an expected expense? Is that an unexpected expense? It's just another way that we're really keeping you to know what's going on with the health of your environment and making sure you're doing what you want to do and having the conversations with the folks that are working on your team as well. And with these, you can also filter on tags. So, right, if I think we had talked about it a couple of times in different ways, but if you have a specific project you're tracking and that project has a specific budget or grant or anything like that, I have one university customer that almost all of the folks that are using their environment and using AWS through them are all researchers, and they have all grant-based projects. So they have hundreds of different alerts set up across those different projects just to make sure that the researchers are knowing where they stand with those grants and making sure they're not blowing through the money there. And then another thing to note is that you can also create this based off of a safe filter. So if you do want to get super granular, you want to maybe add something like a specific region, you want to add something like operation, description, everything that we saw in an advanced grouping report, you can use those filters and plug that into here to base your alert off of if it's a very specific report instead of just looking at an account basis. You do still have to specify which accounts you want within the actual alert itself. So even if you do have advanced grouping saved filter that has accounts selected, those won't be affected. And the same thing with the date range. All the date range things are going to happen inside of this alert itself. And then the same thing with the selecting of the accounts. But in terms of any other filters that you might be using, again, like region, et cetera, those will be done through the save filter. Similarly, we have a percentage version, right? So you could say you wanted to do anything over a 15% spike. And I know that we had that out of the box one that we had on the other email notification page, but this is a little bit more flexible where you could say 12 days, 15%, and compared to the average cost of the previous 7 days, right? You can really get in here and decide whether it's a specific amount that you want to look at or whether it's a percentage and define your parameters of what date range we're looking at. The third and final one is more around contract tracking. So this one works similar to the first one, but you can say, especially for government agencies and people that work in the public sector, they want to make sure that they're hitting their budget. They don't want to underspend. So you can also do alerts on if you're under your threshold of your budget. So you could say, okay, well, we're halfway through the month, right? We should be at, based on previous months, we should actually be at 60% of our spend, that sort of thing. And then you'll get an alert and says, hey, you're actually only at 49% of your budget over the month. And then there's other opportunities that you could go and use CloudCheckr for at that point, whether it's if you're under your budget, maybe you want to go buy some more RIs. Maybe you go and use the RI recommendations and you say, okay, well, to get back up to our budget, we're going to save ourselves some money in the future as well. But those are the overall cost alerts that I just want to run through. I know I'm going through everything kind of fast, so I'm hoping that you guys are picking these up of just these are the places that I need to go. These are the capabilities of what I can do. And then I can go around here. And for the most part, it's fairly intuitive. Once you start to do a couple, and we have, again, so much good stuff at this Success Center. We have so much documentation that'll just walk you through step by step exactly how to set up one of these things in the way that you want it. But I'm hoping that
this is good. Now you're moving fast, but you're also walking through each one of the critical components, kind of step by step, how to set it up. So I think the perfect level. And like you said, and we said earlier, we can always be available if we want to get into a little bit detail on any one of these. So no, I think this is a great use of time. Thanks, Jarrett.
Yeah, no problem. Like I said at the beginning, I know we had a packed agenda. 90 minutes for the entire CloudCheckr platform is it's only it feels like 15 minutes, but yeah, we're getting there. So awesome. Then honestly, I think I might have gone fast enough that we might even have a little bit of time to circle back to anything too if we need to at the end here. But okay, so let's get on to the tagging side of things. So we've gone through where to find your low-hanging fruit. We've gone through how to make sure you're confident in your resources that you have today. We've gone through how to get the recommendations of what's next. We've gone through how to investigate into what costs you have that are coming through. The next thing we're going to go through is the tagging side of things. So we're going to start with tagging rules, which again, I'm sure everyone here on this call has the most perfect tagging strategy that all of their developers follow to a T. They never have like misspellings or they never use the wrong capitalization when they're doing their tags because you guys have a perfect tagging strategy in place.
Right.
And we all live in that world.
Yes.
So what you can do within CloudCheckr is you can actually create tagging rules, right? So you could go and you can create a tag and say, I don't know, let's say production test here. And so all resources, I want to have a production key. And I'm going to say, actually, you know what? I don't want all of my resources for every account to have a production key, but I am going to pick on Mr. Aaron Gettings because I know that he is not good with his tagging strategy of putting on the correct production keys. I can then go and create this rule, and that will create it for just this account, right? And then I could go and say, all right, now I've got this rule that says every single time that something is created in the Aaron Gettings account here, these resources must have a production key. I'll go into CloudCheckr and I will go to my improperly tagged resources, and I can go and filter based off of this rule. I will admit, I don't actually know if Aaron is bad at tagging his production keys, but you get the idea. You can then filter based on that rule that you've created and see, okay, is this key being adhered to for this customer, for this account, for this group? And of course, this one is not in this instance. So let's just use an overall, who's breaking any of the rules that we have going on right now. And this is, again, another way that CloudCheckr is creating a tagging construct within the CloudCheckr platform. You're creating these rules that aren't necessarily affecting AWS today. We're not worried about like, okay, this is going to send something to AWS that says I'm doing a poor job with my tagging strategy. No, this is to help you to get to a point where you can start to remediate these issues. You can create these rules and you can go through and see, okay, I have this resource, CloudTrail 1836. It's missing it's missing the key from the wildcard rule that I've put in place, right? Now I can go to AWS and I can remediate that tag, and I can actually go and I have a whole list of everything that is not in the way that my tagging strategy is currently built today. So it's a pretty powerful tool. Additionally, another thing that you can look at is, well, so we're going to go into tag mapping here, but you can really go through and just figure out, okay, what tags or what resources do I have that don't even have tags, right? You can start to look at untagged resources and you can start to get those tagged in the way that you want them to be. But you can, we've seen a lot of people too, that another good use case is if, let's say you have a major migration coming up. And you're creating a new tagging strategy that you're going to be using for this new migration, and you're kind of leaving a bunch of stuff behind because you had a broken tag strategy with your past environment. We've seen people create their tagging structure within CloudCheckr and make sure that they have it down to a T and have it perfect. And then they roll that out to the team during the migration. And then they're using that when they're doing the migration so that they're coming in with a tagging strategy that's working for them. And they're not having any resources that come in untagged. They're not having any resources that have issues where someone's writing production and someone else is writing prod and someone else is writing, an incorrect spelling of production. If you're not doing a migration, you're not starting from scratch. Another way that CloudCheckr can help today is by going through and looking at tag mapping, right? So one example, let's see, one to pick on here. Let's just do CC environment, right? So right now, well, actually, I guess let me start here before. When you're creating a tag to map, right, you're specifying a tag key and you're picking a tag value. It's that easy to start. You just create those two, and then you can go and do additional configurations of that. So right here, we had the tag key of CC environment, and we had the tag value of production. So what we would expect here is that any cost tagged with environment :production is going to have its cost mapped to the tag key CC environment and the tag value production, right? As you can see here, we also have a second version where it's environment and prod. So we're bundling these two together. You could even, again, go and put misspellings, but this is for those structures that have sort of just started to sprawl. You have a tagging structure that's just absolutely sprawling in terms of developers doing different things across the board. It's really hard to get an idea of where your costs are using just tags if you're not using a perfect tagging strategy. So what CloudCheckr does is helps you to make one unified tag that's going to encompass all of those other potential tags that you're using, and then you can create a value that is then used in CloudCheckr for reporting. Does that all make sense in terms of creating a tagging rule? how to identify which of the resources aren't following those tagging rules, and then how to create your own mapping of tags.
Yeah, and I think, it's one way of looking at it is definitely, fixing what's broken. But another way is, like you were saying before, Jarrett, if you have a migration or some kind of project that, on existing resources that's not tagged to your specific project or whatever, this can be used for that project's purpose or for billing, right? If you have, you want to just get a sense of what that spend is for a certain project that could span across different accounts, and most of the time do not have correct tagging, you can use the mapping to get what you need. Then, utilizing the powerful advanced grouping to report on that tag, then you can see what that spend is uh, holistically. Yeah, which is good.
Yeah, and Hong, you just read my mind, because that was the next report that I was going to run back to. I promised that it was coming back, and we are going to go into the advanced grouping report right now just to look at that. We'll even use the one we just looked at just for continuity's sake and say, okay, now again, I'm going to look at July. I'm going to look at the whole month here, and that's August. So I don't want to click that. I want to click there, July. And we're going to go look through in the group buys, it was CC environment that we were looking at. So let's take that tag that's been created, that's bundling the prod and the production, and we're going to say CC environment right here. And then last time we did it by service, description, usage type, and month, I believe. So let's do it by, let's change the order too slightly. So again, just as I mentioned, the stacked order is just sort of how those columns are going to progress. So you can do a bunch of different configurations if you want, and you can find the one that works best for you. Often I'll do month first, but let's do month second for this one just to look at it in a different way. And we're going to look at all the accounts, and we're going to that's pretty much everything we want here for the values. We've got the value here for the tag, and yeah, let's see what this returns.
Yeah, for those few times that, with customers that we have that have pretty good tagging, this makes it so much easier. I mean, not that it's impossible without tagging, but with tagging is just day and night as far as what you can see.
100%. Yep. Just being able to have a much better mapped tagging strategy it can really change your reporting. That's for sure. And so, yeah, there we go. We've got there's the tag key value, and we get the production tag that has aggregated those other two tags that are combined now to make this one unique production tag that we created within CloudCheckr. And again, we're going to break it down by service, and then we're going to break it down by month. And I guess in this case, we're only looking at 1 month, but if we were looking at several months, right, it would just keep rolling down. And again, description is always extremely powerful when you're doing investigation. I know I've harped on that a little bit, but it's a lot of data that you get here, but it's extremely helpful when there's something that you don't know why it's happening in your environment, and that's never a good feeling that you want to be experiencing. So. All right, let me just double check here on our agenda. I know that I did just sort of wrap, like, it's moving a little quick, but we have now covered. We talked about just all the baseline features here, right? We talked about the cloud environment health. So that can be kind of wrapped up between creating dashboards that give you a quick overview of what the trends are looking like for your environment. We talked about the best practice checks, which obviously are a big part of the health of your environment. We talked about billing alerts and being able to set those up so you have different thresholds, budgets, that sort of thing. We also talked about email notifications. So being able to set up those email notifications on new best practice checks, being able to set them up on budgets. All of those are going to contribute to just how is the health of your environment. Is it a thumbs up, thumbs down, give you a just general overview. We then talked about the low-hanging fruit for cost optimization. Again, as Hong said, you really want to start with that cost savings report. That'll give you all the idle, the unused pieces. Then you want to go to right sizing, make sure that all of the instances that you already have are in the proper size. And then you want to move over to the recommendations where you can say, okay, now what on-demand spend do I have that I'm going to be moving to an instance? We have the granular cost analysis, which again is that tool, the advanced grouping tool, which is going to become your best friend as you become a power user of CloudCheckr. I promise you. If you find another tool that is far more helpful as you go through the process, also please let me know that along with your perfect tagging strategy. I would be very curious as to see what tools you guys are finding to be as beneficial, if not more, than the advanced grouping report. But that one is really where you're going to go and do that cost analysis and even anomaly detection, right? Looking month over month at things that don't make sense. The resource utilization is kind of covered by that right sizing that we talked about. And then even within the best practice checks too, I guess we didn't dive into them too into depth on the other side, but if you go into the best practice checks, you can also find checks not just around cost and security, which were the two that we were using as examples there, but you can look at different usage best practice checks. You can look at different availability. So just knowing what's going on with all of the resources that you currently have in your environment can be done by right sizing and then also the best practice checks. And then we talked about the custom tags, how you can create those, and then the mapping of the custom tags that you've created back to CloudCheckr in the cost reporting and being able to look at things, even not just cost reporting, but you can also use some of those for budget alerts or that sort of thing.
Can you talk maybe just a little bit about for organizations that maybe don't have a great tagging strategy, but have the desire to improve there? How can the data here help gives them some visibility and help them ultimately create a better tagging strategy?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, the thing I would start with is the uh, tagging rules. So let's just go in and create some rules that in a perfect world, what would you like your environment to look like? Like, do you want production tags on every single piece of a certain account? And I would say you just start there. You create rules of what it looks like in a perfect world, and then you start running those reports of what accounts aren't adhering to these rules that I've created. And then in the meantime, while you go and fix things on the AWS side, you can use the tag mapping feature again just to create those tags so you can still continue your day to day. You can still do all of your reporting now. You don't have to wait for that tagging strategy to be back in place, but then it gives you just different pieces you can start to chip away in the AWS side of things and start to remediate.
Right. So whiteboard kind of how you want it or scratch out how you want it, and then you can basically see where your holes and your gaps are.
Yep, exactly.
Perfect.
And I'm sure, I guess one other suggestion would be to talk to you guys. You guys have done this thousands of times, I'm sure, at this point for other customers and helping them build tagging strategy, helping them remediate their tagging strategies. I know it's something you guys are well versed in.
That's helpful. I mean, obviously, to your point, Jarrett, we poured through a lot. So there's about 15 minutes shy of where we were, but without it, just a ton of Q&A. But I know we hit people with a lot of information. I thought it was great detail, good level, right? Not just marketing brochure level, but I think at the in an hour and 15 minutes, able to give like kind of real use case instances that I think can get a lot of people thinking. So I think that was fantastic. Um, Hung, anything on your side that you either want to touch on that you haven't already or just mentioned before we close out?
Yeah, I think the only other thing is that you might find as you play around with advanced grouping, which I strongly suggest recommend doing, is when you put more than four of those columns, um, and or if you want to go very detailed, which I've done many times, into getting instance or resource IDs, it will prompt you to say, hey, well, it's basically it's useless to show that on the screen because it'll take you forever to scroll through. It's going to force you to like put in an email address where it'll email you the CSV. So it takes some time to render, send you a link, and you just go ahead and download it, and you get a ginormous CSV where you can sort, filter, do whatever Excel magic you need to do. But I mean, it can, like I said, it's powerful. It could get very granular. You can get spend down to an hour a day, whatever you like, to really track down, spend spikes or leaks.
Good stuff. No, thank you guys. So Hong and Jarrett, thank you very much. For those of you guys that joined us, thank you very much. For those of you that are watching this on demand, obviously we'll hope that you gathered some information that just helps you with your overall day-to-day cloud management. We're always here to help, as is our close partner, the CloudCheckr team. So certainly reach out to PTP and we can engage you with the right people if we want to get in any more detail on this. So with that, I think we'll close out the session. Hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Again, once again, Jarrett and Hong, thank you guys very much for really valuable information today. And we'll talk to everyone down the road. Take care.